since most of the time, all year, I sit on this side of the pulpit, and I'm aware of the acoustical problems of this synagogue. I'm going to ask you to, the minute there's some difficulty in hearing me since there's no loudspeaker, please signal to me, and I will comply. Now let me ask you this, who can't hear me now too well? The fact that you responded means that you can hear. Dear friends, 15 years ago, approximately, I was invited by the Yiddish Authors Organization of Israel to participate in a public hearing, or as they call it in Yiddish and also in Hebrew, literarischen Mishpat, a literary trial. It used to be quite common 30, 40, 50 years ago here and in Europe and in Jewish circles in the United States. And I was asked what role I will take, whether I will take the position of that of prosecutor or whether I will accept the defense in his behalf. Having been influenced by the attitude to Bashevis Singer in Yiddish literary circles, I was inclined to accept the role of prosecutor. At that time, however, I was negotiating with Mr. Bashevis Singer on the possibility of coming for a series of lectures at Bar-Ilan University. And so I realized that in the vested interest of the institution, I have to forego my preference and assume the role which I did not prefer, that of the defense. Now I admit it was a decision and not a very honest one at the time. But I can say to you that this is one of the most significant decisions that I've made in terms of my understanding and appreciation of Yiddish literature. Because in assuming that role of defense, I sat down and for a few weeks read and reread many of his writings. And something happened to me in the process of reading them. And when I appeared at this public hearing, at this public trial of Bashevis, I could speak with honesty and integrity. Now, as some of you have noticed in what appeared on Bashevis Singer in the press recently, and most recently, there has been an attitude of criticism to him in some circles, and particularly in Yiddish circles. Now, this negative attitude to Bashevis Singer was based on a number of considerations and factors. One is the heavy eroticism of many of his works, often bordering on the pornographic. I recall a situation, an incident in Miami Beach a few years ago when Bashevis, after receiving the Nobel Prize, and may I say in parenthesis that he's the only author in Yiddish or Hebrew who ever received the full Nobel Prize. Are you aware of that? Agno received only half a prize. He spoke in a Reform temple, stood near the Aron Kodesh, and decided to read one of the most erotic and actually pornographic stories of his. und unser jüdischer Oiler. Most of them secularists, but very committed to the Jewish ethical and moral tradition, felt very, very uncomfortable, never forgave him for that, and a good many in the audience actually left. So this is one reminiscence and one characteristic and one reason for the attitude to him. Another factor in the negativism was his departure from the Jewish ethical tradition in his writing, where, how shall I put it, in his major work, the first of his major works, Satan in Goreh, when the Doy, the authority in Yiddish literature, Shem Nika, wrote his review essay, he said that after reading the novel on the conflict between the devil and God, he is not sure whether the author is really not on the side of the devil. As a matter of fact, he further said, or it was said, that the reader sometimes feels that Bashevis actually is the emissary of Satan. Now, this was the second factor in the antagonism to him. A third was something which is not very well known today, and that is that he also was a literary critic, writing under the name of Yitzhak Warshawski. And he used that column to attack and berate every Yiddish author. And there is a Professor Yitzhak Warshawski of the Sorbonne, who now lives in Jerusalem, told me that when he lived in Paris, Yiddish authors would come to him and say, Professor Warshawski, was wilt ihr von uns? Why did you attack me? And all of his attempts to convince the people that it wasn't he, it was somebody else who was using the name Yitzhak Warshawski, proved of no avail. Then there was another reason for the negative attitude to him, and that is, and I will elaborate upon it later, his failure to respond as an artist to the miracle of Israel. The man, the artist, who gave the finest, most sensitive, and most memorable expression to the problems and the issues and the trauma and the depth of the tragedy of the Holocaust, failed completely to understand and appreciate Israel today. And this is best characterized by the particular novel which we were to analyze at this public hearing that I mentioned a little while ago, 15 years ago in Tel Aviv. At that time, his novel, The Balshuva, in English, The Repentant, appeared. It's the one book which devotes a good part of the book to the Israel theme. And I want to remind you of the story where this is an Alter Balaverik, an American Jew, who is immersed in sexual licentiousness, and he decides to become a Choser B'Tshuva, a Baal Tshuva, and he comes to Israel. And in Israel he turns into a believing, Orthodox Jew, and he examines everything in Israel, and he comes to the conclusion that the only place in Israel where there's a high ethical standard, where there's real morality, where no one is interested in money, where the monetary considerations play no importance in religious life, is Mea Sha'arim, is the ultra-Orthodox theme. This is the basic theme in that book. As a matter of fact, it was panned by the critics in the New York Times, and one of them suggested, half seriously, that on the basis of that book, the Nobel Prize should be recalled. But in addition to these factors, there's also another aspect, characteristic of Bashevis, which alienated him from the Yiddish, I won't call it establishment, from the Yiddish literary tradition. Let me for a moment expatiate on this. An author in Yiddish or an author in Hebrew 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago was not just an author. The medium that he used it for a message. There was the message in his medium. The writer considered himself a shaliach, a messenger, in a way approaching the prophetic. Then not those who escaped the yeshivas and the Hasidic shtibels wanted a substitute for the Rebbe and the Rosh Yeshiva. And they found it in the Yiddish or Hebrew author. Just read Bialik's poem about Acharam, where Acharam becomes the spiritual authority for the generation. And Bialik himself was regarded that way. And Levi, the author of the Golem, the great Yiddish poet, in addition to being a great poet, was also considered a great person. And there was a halo about him. I recall bringing Levi to my congregation in Grand Rapids many years ago. And he addressed the congregation in Yiddish. And they didn't understand what he said. But his personality, his spirit, his faith generated such an attitude of reverence for him. What I'm trying to say is that a Yiddish author regarded himself as an heir to the golden tradition of Jewish spiritual, religious, and moral heritage, which begins with the prophets and goes to our own day. And Peretz called it the golden akate, the golden chain. And Yiddish as well as modern Hebrew literature seeks its roots or its links in that chain. Bashevis was the exception. I met him numerous times, and on one occasion I asked him, "What are you trying to say? Do you have any message in your writing? What is your purpose in writing?" And he said to me, "Zwei Sachen. Ich will erzählen a gute Meise und ich will verdienen a Sachgeld." That's what he said to me. Now, with that kind of approach, you can understand why he was not a persona grata, neither with the Yiddish readership nor with the Yiddish intelligentsia. And to some extent, it had some but limited influence also in Hebrew circles. Now, coming back to what I'm relating, this personal recollection. After I agreed to take the position of the defense for Bashevis Singer, I sat down, I read him, and I was converted. I was fascinated, and I was enchanted. And it is this message, in contradiction to what you have read in the papers, in contrast to it, that I want to bring to our people here this evening. And on what basis? Well, I should call attention to the fact that Nobel laureate Yiddish author Bashevis Singer owes his initial international popularity to American Jewish literati in the 1950s who discovered in his Satan in Gorei, which was published in 1935 in Yiddish and in 55 in English, they discovered in it the shtetl counterpart to Peyton Place. And now you can understand why I renamed my lecture as announced the Shabbos on the basis of what I've told you now of his two novels, from Peyton Place to Meir Sha'arim. And this was enhanced by novelettes that followed in short order. drawing material from the rich source of Jewish mysticism, superstition, and folklore, only superficially tapped by other Yiddish authors. For the American Jewish intellectual, Singer was a welcome alternative to the nostalgic romanticism of Jewish life in Eastern Europe as expressed by a plethora of Yiddish prose and poetry writings from Peretz and Warsaw to the emigre authors in New York. Now, throughout his long literary career, which began in a Warsaw journal in 1932, Singer produced over 30 volume-length novels and dozens of numerous short stories. Many of them still remain unassembled in book form in the pages of the forwards of the Yiddish Daily Forward. Much has been regarded as of questionable merit, designed to attract and excite the reader with its eroticism. However, the question that I want to pose now and answer is, how do you judge a writer? How do you judge a person? Do you evaluate a person for his foibles or for his qualities? Do you judge an author for his weaker works, or do you judge him by his better works? Is Milton a great master in English literature because he wrote Paradise Lost, or because he failed in his Paradise Regained? Most of the works of Charles Dickens are not read today. But Charles Dickens is a great novelist because of 3 or 4 works that he wrote. In other words, I maintain that you judge an author or you judge a rabbi by the good sermons he gave and not by the bad sermons that he sometimes may give. Please let the members of the board take cognizance of this. You see, you know the Yiddish expression, "Mi ist doch mehr nicht wie ein Mensch." And someone once added, "Un amol dosoy." And if this applies to a human being, it applies to an author as well. And much of it was done to write a good story, oder zu verdienen a Sach Geld. But the singer, who will remain in Jewish literature, and I'm not using the term Yiddish, in Jewish, Yiddish and Hebrew literature, and in literature written by all Jews, who will remain perhaps the greatest master next to Sholem Aleichem or Peretz, is Bashevis Singer, because of 3 works of his. And let's see whether you can guess what I regard as the 3 masterpieces of literature.
The manna?
Well, I do not now with this whole movement of feminism in a conservative synagogue. I don't want to disagree with a lady. However, I'll tell you what I regard them as. First of all, it's Satan and Gereg that I mentioned. The second was My Father's Court, and the third is The Slave. If I would have to choose between the 10 greatest novels of the century written by Jews, The Slave would be among the first 4 or 5. And I shall try to explain and prove. Well, how about all of this, the pseudo-pornographic and the erotic, and what we know, what we have read about? How about it? How do we understand it? Well, I think that there is something in Jewish literature and tradition which we often fail to remember. And it's this. Bialik and Ravnitsky sat for years and assembled the legends of the Talmud, and this became a classic in Hebrew literature, and it's called Sefer Haggadah. Came Michael Yosef Bardichevsky, a great Hebrew author, and he also collected the legends of the Talmud and assembled them in 3 volumes called Makor Israel, with this difference. Bialik was selected. Bardichevsky was selected too. Bialik took only that which represented the great Jewish spiritual tradition and excluded anything which didn't fit into this. Came Bardichevsky, and in volumes quantitatively as large as Bialik's, Bardichevsky assembled all the other stories and legends and superstitions and aberrations and ethical distortions, also from Jewish sources. There is another tradition. It's not an official one, but an actual tradition in Jewish literature and in Jewish life, which is Nicht Azoytekovik. And we found it in our work, in our sources. Let me just mention something, which will be a surprise to most of us. I am going to quote Daf 21, or paraphrase, Daf 21 of Sanhedrin. And in Sanhedrin, the Talmud tells us, commenting on a passage in the first chapter of the book of Kings, when Bathsheba with Nathan the prophet came to visit old King David lying on his deathbed practically. V'hamelech zakein, it says, and the king was old. And then it says, and she came into his room. The Talmud says that David that night had intercourse with Bathsheba for 13 consecutive successful times. Now this is the Gemara. There are numerous passages. You know, it's good that many of our young people are so far away from our sources that they're not exposed to much of the pornographic, actual erotic and pornographic material that we find. Many of the stories which Bashevis utilized as basic material, he took from 2 Musar books, which were very common in Jewish homes until 30, 40 years ago. One is Kavayosha, and the other is the Shevet Musa. Kavayosha appeared in the year 1700. Shevet Musa a few years later. And if you want to read bedroom stories, criminal stories, erotic incidents, aberrations of Jewish life, you read them in that book. They bring all the stories in order to preach against them. And in each case they say this and this happened, and this took place. So there is in addition to the highway of Jewish thought and life and literature, there are the bypasses. There are the labyrinthine underground channels. And Bashevis drew from those for many of his stories. Now let's go to the first book that I mentioned. And the book is Satan and Gorel. The setting is the Shavsi Tzvi era, which means in 1648, 1649, there was a prelude to the Holocaust which we witnessed in our day. The Khmelnytsky pogroms, which destroyed hundreds of Jewish communities. And there were hundreds of thousands of Jews who were killed in these pogroms. And a few years later, with the Eastern Europe Jewish community nearly decimated, there emerged in about 1663, 1664, a charismatic personality, Shabtai Tzvi, announced himself as the Messiah, and and Jewish masses throughout the world flocked to him. There is a diary written by a woman who lived at the time called Lippel von Hamlin, and she reports the reaction in Jewish communities to the announcement that Shabtai Tzvi the Mashiach is coming. She tells us there how entire Jewish communities packed their belongings and sat and waited for a cloud to come so they can be lifted to the cloud and be transported to Israel. And in that enthusiasm and intoxication, followed by Bashevis Singer converting to Islam, there was a deep psychological and spiritual trauma in Jewish life, which produced what he describes in his book, Satan and Bereit. And the basic theological premise, and it may be incongruent when I'm talking about a novel and using the word theological premise, but the theological premise of that book, or that story, of that event in Jewish life, is again a quotation from the Talmud. And Talmud says that the Messiah will come under one of two conditions. Either Bedor Shekulo Zakai or Bedor Shekulo Chai. The Messiah will come when the entire generation is righteous, or when the entire generation is sinful, is evil. And there is a justification for the latter part. Look, when everybody is a tzaddik, then Mashiach is practically there. When the whole world is pervaded with evil, then the world could be destroyed. God intercedes, and his interceding means the coming of the Messiah. So after the Messiah disappointed and shocked the Jewish community, there was a movement later through the personality of Jacob Frank to bring Messiah not through good deeds, but through evil. And so by practicing evil, by breaking down family norms and standards, by sinking to the mire and filth, morally and spiritually, maybe this is the way to bring Messiah. And this is what he depicts in that particular book. Now it's very interesting. Aaron Seitel, who died a few years ago here in Jerusalem, who was a Hebrew writer and a Yiddish writer and a deeply religious personality, he was Bashevis' closest friend. And when he wrote the review on Satan and Bereit, he called that book a masterpiece of Jewish asceticism, of purity, of sanctity, which is another approach. Of course, if you read it, you will find it altogether different. In any event, he captured, Singer, the spirit of despair, which led to a messianic movement in bringing redemption, not through good deeds, but through sin. And this he gave artistic expression, and he later elaborated upon it in many of the short stories, which became very, very popular in English translation, and eventually led to his receiving the Nobel Prize. Let's go on to the second. The second story, the second book is called My Father's Court. And this is a series of reminiscences, artistically elaborated upon, combination of fiction and reminiscence. His father was a rabbi of the crime and poverty-infected district of Warsaw. And he recalls all the people who would come to the rabbi. They would come to the rabbi for all forms of disagreement and litigation. and he has a series of 60 vignettes, 60, from his father's court. Now, the characters mainly are his father and his mother, the Rebbetzin. It was said today in the article in the Jerusalem Post, mention was made of his negative attitude to women. In a way, Bashevis reminds me of my father, and my father believed that there were actually three sexes, or three categories. There are men, there are Weiber, and there are his granddaughters. And they were in a class by themselves. Bashevis follows more or less that same approach. There are men who sin, there are women who seduce, and there is his mother. His mother, the tzaddikas. His mother, the epitome of purity and spirituality. His father, the rabbi, is a very naive, simple man who has much in common with the people around him, primarily because of being so poor. I want to take just two vignettes, two scenes from that book to give you an indication of what the book really is. One is the scene of a ceremony, a marriage ceremony, where the bride is a prostitute. A young man comes to his father, the rabbi, and he asks what the rabbi's opinion is in marrying a prostitute, a Jewish prostitute. At first, the rabbi's shocked, he doesn't know what to answer. After talking it over with the rabbis and considering it, he says to the young man, "This is a mitzvah to redeem a Jewish girl from sin." And so the ceremony takes place. Now, the bride is dressed as a pious Jewish color with an entourage of her professional colleagues, along with the pimps and the madams of Warsaw. And there was another thing. You know, there was another component to Jewish life. We suppress it. We often tend to forget it. Do you know, may I say parenthetically, that in one of the largest Jewish communities in the world, in Argentina, there was an entire community for years of Jews and families that an entire industry led by Jews, an industry of prostitution. And they would send representatives to small towns in Poland, supposedly as potential grooms, and ensnare Jewish daughters and bring them there. And there was a battle in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, for 30, 40 years. There was a battle between one part of the Jewish community and this other section, based on prostitution. They even had their rabbi, all of the pimps and the madams, who officiated for them. And they were excommunicated, and intermarriage with them was forbidden. I remember an incident when I was the guest of the Rio de Janeiro Jewish community a number of years ago. When I was there, a question arose before the leadership of the Jewish community. See, they weren't allowed to be buried even on the Jewish cemetery. They had their own cemetery. And the government approached the Jewish community and said they have to approve this cemetery and whether the Jewish community will preserve it. It became a real dilemma. Shall the Jewish community now take care of them whom it refused to accept and excommunicate throughout their lives? So we're coming back to this scene here. Now this scene, this marriage scene in his father's home, given this setting, given the mechutonim, is transformed into an emotionally charged and spiritually cleansing experience of purity and sanctity, as the very people from the dregs of society, join the bride in shedding tears of joy and sadness. These people, from the depth of filth, on this occasion, in this setting, rise and ascend to a spiritual level. And after the ceremony, one procurer, in a burst of emotion and affection, comes over to the rabbi and he says, Rebbe, ihr seid a teure Ried. Ich soll sein euer Kapor. I should be your scapegoat, in an expression of emotion and gratitude. Ich bin nicht wert, die Erde auf euer Padeste. I'm not worth the dirt on the sole of your shoe. Now, for an author to take so much dirt and filth and to elevate it into such beauty and purity, that requires a great artist. Another episode to which I will refer very briefly is a portrait of a Gentile washerwoman, a simple, untutored Polish peasant woman who emerges as the epitome of humanity and morality, even in the eyes of the rabbi's wife. And it's no accident that this book took many years before it was translated to English, because the English-American Jewish intellectual wasn't interested in Jewish life being depicted in that way, through the eyes and the setting of his father, the rabbi, and the mother. They were interested in the pagan places. And now let's go on to the third novel. The third novel was written approximately 40 years after the first, after Satan Gershon. And I mentioned the novel is The Slave. Now, The Slave takes us back to this, more or less, to the same period as Satan and Gershon. About the same time. And the story, as you recall, is that here is a young man who loses his family in the pogroms and the massacres, is taken into captivity, becomes a slave in a remote Polish village in the hills, and there he meets a peasant girl. His name is Jacob, and he meets a peasant girl by the name of Wanda, and they fall in love. Now, The Slave is a full-length novel of drama, suspense, and adventure, replete with inner soulful probings and outer human conflicts, Jew-Gentile confrontations, and intra-Jewish clashes, a success of events and villains in a stormy era joined together by the love of two young people. The village setting, one of disintegration and demoralization. Everything is just schmutzy there, physically. It took great delight, I must say, Bashevis took great delight in describing all the physical deformities of all of his characters. And if we would count them up in their hundreds, 99% of them we would see in their physical deformities, as well as ethical and spiritual. Now, in the Gentile village, in the Dorf, it's even worse. This is primitive, superstition, crime, sexual licentiousness, no standards. Now, the world is destroyed, more or less, the Jewish world, and there's one survivor, Jacob. The Gentile world is deep in sin and depravity, but there's one beautiful soul, and that's Wanda. So he takes the young Jew, beautiful in appearance and in soul, and the Gentile girl, who's also different from her environment, and he develops this love story between them. And you read the novel with great suspense. And there's no question that the readership, the international readership, has shown that Bashevis can tell a good story and knows how to tell it. but what makes the novel such a great novel. I want to suggest something which I haven't seen anyone else mention until now. I believe that Bashevis Singer, who wrote The Slave, after the Holocaust, in his artistic subconscious, is responding to the Bashevis Singer before the Holocaust, who wrote Satan in Garden. If the first has little which is redeeming about it in ethical and moral or spiritual terms, the second is altogether something else. You see, you couldn't, a conscientious Jewish writer, couldn't say after the Holocaust the same thing that he said before the Holocaust, because today it's kulam kedoshi, in the double meaning of the term kedoshi. And so in this novel, where its realistic setting is the 17th century, the atmosphere that it breathes and breathes is the Holocaust of the 20s, the post-Holocaust. And in the story, intertwined and interwoven in the story, are the issues of the Holocaust, the problems that still disturb us today. How is it possible for a just God to allow or to close his eyes to the slaughter of the Jewish children? It's the problem of the just who suffer and the evil who prosper. It's the problem of providence as against free will. He even brings in the question of a good God creating a world in which most of the living beings are subjected to brutality. I'm referring to animals. You know that he was a vegetarian all his life. One of his masterful short stories is called The Showcase. And I present here a challenge. I would like to see the person who reads that short story, and let's say at 5 or 5:30, which will take him about 50 minutes to read it, and is capable of sitting down to eat even a kosher meal after that. And there's the issue of what are the lessons of the Holocaust. He shows how after the Holocaust, it's as if nothing happened. The same life and the same corruption in Jewish leadership and the same conflicts. And here is a beautiful young couple that suffer or subjected to punishment from the Gentile world as well as the Jewish world. I must say that in depicting the Jewish community, he puts it on a much higher level than the Gentile community of that day. But anoch naveh to the kind of level it is, even when it's better. So the slave, a book of suspense, a book of about 400 pages, a wonderful novel, is, as I indicated just a while ago, the Bashevis Singer of after the Holocaust, answering the Bashevis Singer of prior to the Holocaust, and in a way compensating for the kind of picture he drew of Jewish life in Poland and Russia in his original novels. Now these three stories are going to be in the Mizrach of Jewish literature, and they place him among the great authors in Yiddish and Hebrew, without casting reflections on anyone of great authors. I can tell you that some of the most celebrated Hebrew writers, without mentioning their names, of the past generation, it's very difficult to read a book right to the end. It just doesn't capture your interest. But Bashevis Singer, when you pick it up, you read it to the end. And now, I want for a moment to come back to what I said at the beginning. It's amazing, or perhaps it's not amazing, to realize that the master of literature, who depicted and understood the Holocaust and its intellectual and moral issues and problems so well, and gave it such artistic expression, remained blind and deaf to the miracle of Israel, to the phenomenon of Hebrew reborn, the language, to the romance of the kibbutz, to the establishment of the state. But I say maybe it isn't amazing, because we have in nature and in human beings the law of compensation. When one climbs or achieves so much in one direction, he's not capable of doing equally as well in another direction. But don't misunderstand it. Bashevis Singer at no time expressed himself against the Jewish state. He never identified himself with any of the so-called liberal Jewish intellectuals in any criticism of the Jewish state. He regarded himself politically as a conservative. He told me that. And he wrote in the traditional conservative 19th century style, which was based upon telling a good story. And in spite of that, he developed a world readership. Before I conclude, I want to mention something else. Two things. Bashevis in English translation. Bashevis in English falls quite short of Bashevis in Yiddish. And not only because of translation, for another reason. He supervised the translations. And anything in the original Yiddish which he felt would interfere with the potential sales, he deleted or he changed in the English translation. And what happened? All Hebrew translations are from English, with the exception of Sefer Gereya, which was translated by Lipson, the editor of Hatzofei, many, many years ago. And I'll give you an example. In the original book, that I discussed before, the Al Tshuva, the repentant, he has this passage at the end. He says, Adi Kinder was lernen in the yeshivas in America in English, those who study in the day schools in America and also study Judaism in English, they will not grow up to be good Jews. On die in Israel, was reden Hebräisch in der Havara Hasfardit, Now, in English translation, the second sentence appears. The first is deleted. Why? Who are his readers? Jews in New York. They will see that he's telling them that all the English-speaking Jews and the Orthodox Jews, or the conservative Jews, they are unfaithful to Jewish tradition. They'll never get children won't be Jews. It will interfere with his sales. He omitted it. Another problem in translation is that there is no Yiddish or Hebrew author in Bashevis' generation whose writing is so saturated with allusions to Jewish texts and traditions and practices and folklore and sources. And one has to have great erudition in order to be a good translator. And we don't have it. His own son, Israel Zamir, who lives in Beit Alto, who translates from English into Hebrew. I'll give you, here is his translation of the first 5 lines of the repentance in Hebrew or in Yiddish. Ich bin von der Gese von Yid HaKodesh, which means I'm a descendant of the Yid HaKodesh. Who was the Yid HaKodesh? The Yid HaKodesh was a great Hasidic Rebbe who lived 150 years ago. This is the original. Here is the Hebrew. Ani mizera kedoshim. I'm coming from the English. I'm a descendant of Marcus. The one who translated into English didn't know the original, didn't understand, and the Hebrew is a translation from the English. So the English suffers, but it's not only that. I have become convinced that next to Shalom Aleichem, there is no Yiddish author who knew Yiddish as well as he does. He had such an attentive ear to all the connotations and and echoes and reverberations of Yiddish. Sometimes I read them, which he wouldn't have liked. He wants you to read them for the story, but I read them just for enjoying the language. And I want to give you one example in the original Yiddish, just for a moment. And I asked the permission of the president of this synagogue to allow me from this pulpit to say something in Yiddish as well. And let me read this to you from my Taten's Bezdin Shul. He is quoting, he's describing a woman in the Machane Yehuda of Warsaw as she's trying to sell some chickens or geese and the kind of mameloshim, the language that she uses. Listen to this. She's trying to sell agams. You know what agams are? She says, "Is denn agam dieses? A kaum dieses, tat der Potter im Himmel. Es gibt sich doch von Schmalz gegossen, so werden alle meine Sonnen, wie was. Oi, Etz is the Polish for you, you know. Oi, Etz nicht haben von der Gans. A ganze Wort Fleisch soll ja kriegen, Brand in die Kischkes, am Magier im Harz, soll nicht der Leben sich hassen zu machen, meine jüngste Tochter, a schwarze Kippe soll mir nicht stellen, hat der Gott in den Himmel. Ich fahre in den Bein. You think I'm earning anything here? Oi, schränken soll ich jeden Groschen was verdienen. Gleich zu, a nicht soll mir mein Leben Scherbler von durch, you know, Scherbler von durch. Put the punctures on the eyes of the dead person. So hat mir angeboten, ein Riebel mehr. Soll also leben mit mir zusammen, aus dem Donnerstag. Und ich will nicht bleiben liegen mit der Schreure wie 7 Schabes. Bei mir liegt nicht kein Fleisch auf Eis. Liegen sollen alle meine Schäden mit Sonne in der Erde. Makis und Pachiren, ob sie ihre Kehr, ob sie ihr Leib am Leben. There are numerous words that I didn't know, and I think I know Yiddish. For example, after this lecture, I'm going to ask whether anybody can tell me what the word pachirim means, makis und pachirim. But this is an example, and in all of the stories, the richest, the deepest, the finest, the largest, and the most juicy Yiddish vocabulary. So I want to say in conclusion, Bashevis Singer was wrong when he claimed throughout his life that he had nothing to say and that he had no message. I recall when he came to Israel some 15, 16 years ago, and he gave an interview to the Hebrew press, which is worth reading today, and he criticized the Hebrew writers today for not drawing from Jewish sources in their writings. This is another aspect of Bashevis. He had a message. Niba, possibly, v'lo yodam ma niba. The difference between a writer and an essayist is that both have a message. The essayist knows what he wants to say. The writer doesn't know. He gives it intuitively and artistic, through the artistic medium. And why was he wrong? He was wrong, and I say he had a message, because as a Yiddish writer, using the Yiddish medium, he couldn't just use words without having something to say. This is the power, and this is the message of the Yiddish medium. And it's because of that he was also right in another comment of his. When he was asked, as the question was asked ad nauseum of every Yiddish speaker, he was asked at one university, what about the fact that Yiddish is dying? And Bashevis said, yes, Yiddish starb, erhalten starben, für die letzten 300 Jahre. Yiddish is down for the last 2,000 years and will continue to die for another 500 years. Bashevis Singer will be remembered as one of the great masters of Jewish literature.
Your comments, please make them questions, and if they're comments, please make them very short. We had one speech tonight, and that's all I want to have. Thank you.
One additional comment to what the president said. Say anything you want as long as you end it with the word question mark at the end. Pardon the code. Excuse me, I'm going to jot down all the questions and then answer them. Yes.
You indicated that Bashevis Singer must be judged not by the volume, the quality of the volume of his writings, but by a select few that you had talked about. And you gave as an example the rabbi who occasionally give a good sermon. The fact that he gives no bad sermons isn't important. I dare say that if the rabbi who gives 5 good sermons and 95 bad ones, it'll be suggested by the board that he go into the insurance business. Now, how do you answer the question of a quantitative approach to a writer? And secondly, how do you feel about the fact that his answer to somebody's question, an interviewer, as to why he appeals to the carnal instincts of man, his answer was business is business. Doesn't that kind of rub you the wrong way?
Next, I'm collecting all the questions. Yes.
I believe that your question about baptism, in Poland, the word was Yiddish with Apollo. It's sort of a scabby head because of some kind of disease or non-cleanliness or whatever. So that was one of the curses that I heard, Yiddish your Jewish power.
Thank you for quoting. Yes.
Hey, I read a lot of Singer, and I didn't notice anything pornographic in his writings. If you can, yeah, I'd like to know which one they were. And B, how did you answer those questions? Were you using the Midrash as an example? If they had things there that he was able to use in his stories?
All right. Yes?
Yes, I've always been unhappy with Bashevis Singer, so my question will reflect this. Do you think Bashevis Singer really wrote for posterity for the non-Jewish world, that he was, in a sense, the greatest Yiddish vulgarizer of Jewish tradition that our heritage has ever seen? And in a sense, he did it deliberately because this was where all his evolution, all his endowed brilliance as a word master, in a sense, was what, in the end, would appeal to the non-Jewish world, a sort of prostitution of Jewish themes. Certainly a problem.
But what he was asked, he said that Yiddish is his mother tongue and that New York is his motherland. And he had not... Is it not true that when he was asked, he said that Yiddish is his mother tongue, but New York was his motherland? And is it not acutely reprehensible that an artist in this day and this age could disregard the most marvelous and wonderful event that happened to the Jewish people in the last 2,000 years?
All right, it'll be 5. Yes.
Sorry to mistake, this is a very famous writer. But, the suffering of his son as a child, 20 years. I mean, young people are reading, you cannot take an example of Singer. Not to see his own son, 20 years, he suffered very much when he was a child. So not long time ago, somebody asked him, how would you like to be remembered? He said, I would like to be remembered as a honest man. I cannot consider a man an honest man when he is staying away from his origin. As a woman, I can't see.
Let me we'll have more questions later. Let me just interject this comment. which answers much of what has been said until now. There seems to be, I am summarizing. Most of the questions bring out the fact, the contrast between what he personally was, perhaps something often in the eyes of some a miserable human being, and between the way I try to describe as an author. Friends, you're forgetting that some of the great authors, some of the great composers were miserable human beings. I did not try to present Bashevis, Mr. Yitzchak Bashevis Singer, as a Jew from Warsaw and in New York, and who lived in New York. I tried to present nicht dem Wochenikin Bashevis, but them Shabbos. The Bashevis who outdid himself. And I don't have to make a list here. And especially now with the biographies that are being written about some of the great heroes in literature and in art and in music in the 18th, 19th, 20th centuries, what kind of lives they were in, how they lived in personally. Who was it? Was it Goethe who said that a great man is capable of great sins at the same time? And I've often told, I've heard somebody who's told his family, thank God I'm not a great man for that reason. We are not discussing nor am I presenting Bashevis Singer, the person. We're talking about Bashevis Singer, the author. On that there were some legitimate questions. In addition to that, as a person, he had his standards. His standards, his commitment to vegetarianism, his antipathy and being repelled by any form of bloodshed. I met him on a number of, I can say in his defense, that we sat down for coffee in Miami Beach, coffee and cake once, and I still have a receipt he paid for it, which very few can point out that kind of achievement. Now, that may be a reflection on me, that's something else. But I mentioned at the beginning of my talk that in this sense, he deviated from the norm and the tradition of Yiddish and Hebrew language. Past generations in the 20th century looked upon the writer as the substitute or the successor to the rabbi and the prophet. And the writer was ready to don that mantle of leadership. And Levin, the great Yiddish poet, always used to say, the writer hebt on mitzvah. He begins by personal example, by himself. Bashevis was different. Now, so I was describing Bashevis the writer. Now, when it comes to Bashevis the writer, there are all these questions. Those who didn't see anything pornographic or erotic don't draw attention, and fine, I have nothing to answer. But I'm talking about the majority of people who have read him and have come to certain conclusions. And the question is, how could he do that? And how at the same time, and by the way, I must admit that the example that I gave of a rabbi was a very poor example. It shows that I too, like Bashevis Singer, can make a mistake, and a very serious mistake. So that was a very poor example. But we judge a master by his achievements. Why did he do? How about the rest that what? How about if we wrote 30 books and 20 of them were trash? How do you count for that? A writer has to make a living too. Sometimes you're right for the market, and sometimes you're right because there's something in you that springs forth, that serves as an all-embracing and all-empowering force and makes you say something. We call it the what?
The urge.
No, not the urge. The muse. Yes, we call it the muse. We're talking about not Bashevis, who often wrote under pen names so that he could make a lot of money. We're talking about Bashevis, whose name is identified with the great novels, and Bashevis, who received the Nobel Prize. And let me say something else. Coming back to Agnon, if you read Agnon, he projects an image of being such a naive, ultra-Orthodox, pious Jew. It's only a pose. It's the pose of an author. It's the act. If that's true for Agnon, and everybody accepts it, then I claim it's also true for Bashevis, who presents himself, he's always a character in his own writings, who presents himself all the time as a womanizer. This is part of the pose. This is part of the act. This is the fiction in the claim for supposed reality when it's really fiction. So all criticism which I've heard in the questions and comments on Bashevis is legitimate. Well, that's not the Bashevis we were talking about. My friends, and this is no time to elaborate upon this, you look into the Chumash and look into the story of Moshe Rabbeinu, and you will see that there are two versions, and both are true of Moshe Rabbeinu. There's the Moshe Rabbeinu who says to God, if you don't forgive the Jews their sin, he says, Mecheni Misifrata, you erase me from your book. In other words, love of Israel to him takes precedence over love of God. And only a few verses before, there's the Moshe Rabbeinu who vows to himself, the Levites, and he personally leads in the slaughter of 3,000 Jews. That's what it says. He personally leads in the slaughter of 3,000 Jews. It's true Moshe Rabbeinu. The Moshe Rabbeinu we want to remember, the Moshe Rabbeinu that we revere, the Moshe Rabbeinu who is our Moshe Rabbeinu, is the Moshe Rabbeinu of the one who says to God, my Mecheni Misipro, erase me from your Torah if you're going to destroy the Jewish people. If that's true of Moshe, it's certainly true of a man like Bashevis Singer. Shalom Aleichem wrote John. There are numerous stories and books, especially some in America, which don't amount to anything. Of the 10 volumes of Peretz, there are 2 that will remain. One is called the Tales of the People, Folk Tales, and the other is called Hasidic. Mendele, half of his published writings are not worth reading, don't represent anything. Literature. We take a lesson from the Bible. The Bible is an anthology. Well, you think almost just said 9 chapters. He may have said enough for 500 chapters. 9 were worth recording and remembering. Our sages in the past were smart enough to hide and conceal the rest. Authors today don't do it. And I think with these comments, I tried to answer all of the reservations that have been made, except for one. And that is with reference to Israel. That, I forgot who mentioned the point about Israel, how he could. You said, I mentioned it myself before, but I think it calls for a little more understanding, in the sense that there was, and there still is, a philosophy in Jewish life called Dorism. Dorism. Not related to a similar word that has to do with art. Do means here. There is an attitude among those intellectuals emphasizing the existence of Jewish life in the Goes and accepting Israel, but not being at all excited about its existence and its miraculous appearance. This is the shortcoming. I mentioned, Doctor, all you did was repeat what I said. So if you want to talk about the Bashevis who failed to understand Israel, that will be forgotten. That plays no role. But there is no author in Judaism at all who gave such expression to the problems and the tragedy and the psychological conflicts and the philosophical issues, and to do it artistically on the Holocaust as he did. And this is the great achievement in the slave era. We didn't have enough time. I'm planning to give a course next year on Bashevis Singer. I have to pass some of the short stories if you want to read an idyllic description of Jewish life, both in Europe and in America, where everything is so beautiful and charming, and not at all idealized, but based on reality, it's called The Three Shoemakers. Anybody read it? The Drei Schusterlach. The Drei Schusterlach. Such charm, such beauty, such love, such affection for Jews, for simple Jews. There's also another side. It's just that the other that he personally promoted, and his translators and his PR people. And sure, he had an eye for the outside world. Every author does. Today in Israel, the major authors are most of the time abroad. And some of them are more popular in translation than they are here. And Dr. Fishman could tell you about many of them. I don't want to mention their names. They are living authors today. And they write with an eye for the outside world. After all, on behalf of the people who enjoyed this lecture tonight, thank Rabbi Winer for his very, very persuasive and dynamically presented defense and explanation of Isaac Bashevis Singer, which was rendered even more persuasive by his honesty in giving all sides those opinions which were derogatory and answering them. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and we appreciate it very, very much.